Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markle, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. If you've tuned into this podcast before, you already know that this show serves a dual purpose. First, providing a safe space for victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault to share their experiences and facilitate healing. Second, it educates professionals across various fields on the principles of trauma-informed care, going beyond superficial understanding to foster effective advocacy. This podcast is renowned for its effectiveness in promoting healing and for furthering knowledge about the prevalence of rape culture in our society and how being trauma-informed is a powerful step in reducing that prevalence. Thank you for joining us today in furthering the goals of this podcast. I'm glad you're here. This is episode 131, which is part 2 of a multi-episode series with my guest, Rachel Izzo. I hope you've had the chance to listen to Rachel's first episode as she explains her past experiences with a weightlifting trainer who groomed and manipulated Rachel into a sexual assault and rape experience that lasted several years because of his coercion and Rachel's vulnerability in the relationship. And for those of you who aren't aware of the power dynamics that occur in these types of abusive relationships, you need to listen to that episode to better grasp what it means to be trapped by an offender, and to realize that the number one predictor that someone may be a future victim of sexual assault is if they're already a survivor of sexual assault. Which leads us to this week's episode, in which Rachel tells of a subsequent rape by someone else who groomed and manipulated her, and how she experienced some of the very same dynamics that she had in her past. Listen in as we pick up right where we left off from last week's episode. Here's Rachel.
So he kicked me out of his apartment. He did this to me and it was like, okay, you have to leave. I had nowhere to go. I had been staying somewhere else in Brooklyn. I was in Manhattan. Like, I wasn't remotely close to where I needed to go. It was 2:00 in the morning and he kicked me out, and I was begging him to stay because I'm thinking, okay, well, if he lets me stay, then he cares about me. And that didn't happen. It was insane, but this is what our brains do. And he kicked me out. I texted Brian, and I don't remember what I texted him, but the next morning he was horrified. I told him what happened, and he was like, you know what that is, right? I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's not an assault. Nope. And we ended up meeting up, and we've talked about this. He felt responsible. I'm like, this is not your fault. We met up and I told him what happened, and he was, well, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck. And I'm like, no. I just was like, no, I'm not going there. I don't remember much of the rest of that trip, but I went home and I was, no, that didn't happen. I just was, nope, it was a consensual sexual. This is what I was telling myself, like, nope, I wanted that. It was consensual. And this is an important thing, part of my healing later. So that's why I'm saying that. And this is not something I talk about, but I'm going to talk about it because I think it's important. When I was there, I started getting a lot of pain in that area. I went home and I was in so much pain that I had a doctor's appointment at the end of that week, but I had to go to urgent care because I was in such excruciating pain I'd never felt before. I tell people, I'm a nurse, pain scale, all the things. The worst pain I ever felt in my life, I usually say, which was when I got stung by a Portuguese man-o-war, which really fucking hurt, by the way. That just hurt. That is painful. But this was actually the worst pain I'd ever felt. And when I went to the doctor, I showed her where I was hurting, and she was, you have herpes. And I remember just wanting to die. I can't pretend this didn't happen, like this happened, and now I have an STD that I can never get rid of. I felt dirty. I felt tainted. No one's going to want me. And luckily it was type 1, which is not as bad in terms of flare-ups that I learned later on as type 2. You can get both on both parts. Doesn't matter the type there, both places. But I will say that I had type 1 because it had been on his mouth. And he had done stuff to me with his mouth that I had tried to push him off of me. So I'm in excruciating pain. And I hadn't told anyone what had happened, really. My family didn't know. And I made up a story. I said, oh, it was from the assault that happened in Oregon a year ago. Because I was like, I can't even go there. So this was February 2013 now. And yeah, I wanted to die. I was like, this is the worst moment of my life, because now I'm like, I'm always going to have this reminder of what he did to me physically. Like, it's always going to be there. If you get a blood test, it's going to be there. I'm talking about this because I want to decrease the stigma with that type of infection as well, STI, because it is so prevalent. If you were assaulted and have an STD, STI, we call them now, don't feel ashamed of that. The right person won't judge you for that. And there are things that you can do to protect yourself and your partner. It was horribly painful, and it took about a month to heal. And at the time I was like, nope, I'm not going to report this, but I decided to confront him myself. So it took me a month, and not about the assault, but by the STD. And after that, I told my doctor what had happened, and she wanted to do like a whole panel of tests. So I did a pap smear. Well, I also got high risk HPV, which causes cervical cancer. I also got that. And then I had to now get pap smears every 6 months for a certain amount of time because I was at risk for cancer. Yeah. And I had the HPV vaccine, but it didn't cover this particular type. So it wasn't the genital wart kind. It was the type that you don't see, but causes damage, cancer. Oh, great. Now I have another thing that I have to worry about. February-ish, early March of 2013, I decided to say something to this man because it's always like about the other person. So I'm like, okay, like if he's going to go do this to somebody else, then he needs to at least know that I have these two things that I can link directly to him. I had a plan again because I was confronting him. I knew that he was going to try to talk his way out of it or whatever. And Brian, again, was my go-to person. I want to say we're trauma bonded, but he's the only person in my life that also knew this man. So he was just the one that I could go to talking about stuff because he and I had this experience together essentially. And he was the only person that knew what was going on and what had happened and the lead up and stuff. So I was telling him about this and he was like, he's going to try to talk his way out of it. And he did. So I confronted him and I told him, and I had rehearsed over and over and over what I was going to say, wrote it down, practiced it. And it had been something like, I was just diagnosed with herpes type 1 and HPV, and you gave it to me. And what am I going to say if he denies it? I haven't had any other sexual experiences. So I could essentially say, no, you did give this to me. So I confronted him over Skype. He denied it. And I'm like, no, I didn't actually do this. So you can tell if you have an HSV infection that is probably new. If you swab the lesions, they will test positive. But if you have a blood test, that will be negative because the exposure is so new, your body won't have antibodies. I think I had done that and I had proven, I'm like, no, like you gave this to me on this night. My blood test is negative. So you gave this to me. And then I tell him about the HPV. And then I tried to change the subject because I was like, no, we're going to talk about writing and everything's fine. I still was in the mind frame of like, everything's fine. And he was so freaked out. He left in the middle of the call to quote unquote, go get tested for everything. And Brian had said, I bet he went to go call his lawyer, half jokingly, but maybe seriously. And he just kept lying to me. He said he got tested for HPV. And no, newsflash, if you don't have genital warts, a man can't get tested for HPV. It doesn't work that way. So there was no way that he could get tested. And then he said, he claimed that he didn't realize this is a 50-something-year-old man that didn't realize the cold sores he had was herpes. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? You write for Law & Order SVU. Of course you fucking know that. So he went all about this apologetic route or whatever. During this time, when I was talking with him, I had said something. I didn't even remotely mention that I felt like he had raped me. I didn't say that. I was not ready to go there. I did confront him later on, but I was not ready to tackle that. It was just about the STDs. And I said something in it that, I don't know if it alluded to that. I didn't even mention the R word or sexual, anything. Didn't mention it at all. And he goes, well, wait a second. I didn't rape you. And I was like, I didn't say that you did. I was like, oh, that's telling. Okay, yep. Interesting. Again, talked about it with Brian, and he was like, that says a lot right there. So at this time, I was really struggling with, I guess you would call it PTSD. I was having angry outbursts. I hadn't told my family. I didn't end up telling my family for quite some time. And I was classic post-trauma, just random angry outbursts. Sleep was off. My life was a mess at that point. And I remember wanting to tell Mariska Hargitay because she had believed me about my first one. Somehow I forgot how I got her email, but I got her email address and I emailed her. And the title of the email was "So-and-so raped me." And I sent that in an email and I got a response back. She emailed me back. And I was like, is this real? And later it was confirmed that it was her. She had emailed me back and she was, let me put you in touch with my organization, Joyful Heart Foundation, so they can properly help you. You're not alone. It was a very nice response. And I was shocked that she had, remembered me and emailed me back. So at that point, this was like March. I started thinking, I got in touch with the CEO at the time, who was very nice. She wanted to help me. If I wanted to file a report, she was going to help me. And this comes in later. And then I started thinking a little bit about reporting, but I was like, no, I'm not ready. And then in May of 2013, I went to the Joyful Heart Foundation Gala. Oh, let me back up. So at this point still, I think I had started therapy. I don't remember exactly, but I was still trying to convince myself that it wasn't an assault. I just made me feel better. I'm like, nope, that didn't happen. He cares about me as a person, all this stuff. So I was still kind of in that mindset. So I went to New York for my 23rd birthday with my good friend at the time. And I had dinner with this guy. And I tried to pretend like everything was fine. And After I had a complete meltdown after I had dinner with him, because I'm like, I can't pretend that this is okay anymore. Like this actually happened and I can't pretend that it didn't anymore. And that was the moment where I can never see him ever again in person. If we can keep it strictly writing and he can still quote unquote help me get to where I want to go, I will keep talking to him. And that's how much I was used to sacrificing myself for my dream. This is a very common theme in exploitation of younger people. You look at the Larry Nassar USA Gymnastics scandal, even with my coach, again, that was the pattern of like, I have to endure this so that you will help me. And I didn't know any different. I was just thinking, okay, I just have to keep the peace. And if he can help me get to where I want to go, I can deal with it. And that was my mentality at the time. But I met up with him in person. And again, I didn't say anything about how I felt about the situation, had a complete meltdown afterwards. And I was like, I can't ever see him again. And he had said that he had asked, so Chris Maloney, what used to be on Law and Order SVU, most people know who he is, loved us. For some reason, he loved Brian and I were on set. And I'd always wanted to like, our birthdays are a few days apart. And I was like, okay, maybe if this guy can get him to come to a birthday dinner, maybe that'll make it all worth it or whatever, something ridiculous I was trying to rationalize in my head. This man said he had tried to talk to Chris Maloney to see if he wanted to come meet us for dinner. And he said that his assistant said he couldn't or whatever. So fast forward to May of 2013, I went to this Joyful Heart Gala and saw all the Law and Order people and talked to Mariska, and she was very nice, very supportive. She had, in fact, read my email and she knew it was me and she remembered who I was. It was a very powerful event. Talked to Chris Maloney. I didn't tell any other of the cast members what had happened because I knew it was a sticky situation in terms of, number one, who's going to believe me. Again, there was a brotherhood in Hollywood, kind of like law enforcement, where if you say something bad about somebody, you can get written off forever. Right. And I'm going to get to that because that's what happened to me eventually. So I was very quiet about who I told, but Mariska knew. So, and she, confirmed that was actually her talking to me through email. I still dreamed of maybe someday Chris Maloney would believe me because he never liked this guy. He made it clear that he never liked him. And at this event, I didn't have the guts to tell him, but I had this interaction with him that was, again, so telling. I told him, he remembered me, which I was, thrilled that he remembered me. And he was like, oh yeah, you're the weightlifter. And it's like, yeah, so had this moment of recognition. And I said, well, I'm so bummed you weren't able to come to my birthday dinner. He was like, what are you talking about? I said, so-and-so, he and I had dinner on my birthday and he said he invited you. He was like, he didn't invite me. He said I would have come. I was like, wait, really? And then he said to me, he's a liar. He's a dirty little liar. Tell him that. You tell him that he's a liar. And it was very clear he did not like this man. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. Just repeatedly lying, typical pattern. So after that event, this was significant because that event caused me to consider filing a police report. I was like, you know what? I know that this would probably never go anywhere. It's probably never going to see a courtroom. I had talked to another woman there that was a friend of Mariska that she and I got close to, but again, eventually everyone cut me off and blacklisted me because of what happened later, which I'll get to. I told her what had happened. She was like, I don't think that you're the first person he's done this to. I just have a feeling. She's like, I feel like he's done this before. And I was like, I think so too.
What was the time span between the rape and this gala?
The rape happened January 6, 2013. Unfortunately, I will always remember that day. My good friend's birthday is the day before, so unfortunately I cannot forget that date. January 6, 2013, the gala was like May 13th, 2013. So February, March, April, like 4 months later.
Just a few months. Okay.
A few months, yeah. That was significant for me because at that event, I was like, you know what? I need to say, again, I need to say something for somebody else. I don't want this to happen to somebody else. So even if I can't get any kind of prosecution or whatever, like at least it's on record. It's somewhere. Yeah. That maybe there's a pattern because it's a very typical scenario. There's alcohol involved, purposely getting you drunk. Mm-hmm. He was a man that slept with a lot of women. I mean, it was even just by the sheer number and how much alcohol had been involved. Even before it happened to me, I was like, I'm sure that, again, how fucked up was my head to think he's done this before. I knew, like that moment that he said that to me about the guy in Oregon who had assaulted me, I was like, he's done this before. And I still put myself in that situation. And this is where some self-blame comes in. But again, trauma does weird things to the brain. I trusted this man and I ignored my gut feelings and red flags and unfortunately got into that situation. So at this gala, I was like, you know what, maybe I'll report, maybe I'll do something. there was two pathways when I did this. And if I had chosen the other way, I most likely would have never been in this situation with NYPD. And that haunts me to this day still. I got home and I was in therapy at the time. I had a great therapist. And I told her I was thinking about reporting. I had an advocate as well. I'd also told the CEO of Joyful Heart, I had been in communication with her. I said I wanted to report. And she got me some contact numbers through the DA's office. She was very nice. She was going to help me go the DA route. And she said, I called them for you. You just have to call this number. It was a slightly different route than calling the NYPD directly. And that's important. And then my therapist and her advocate, this was now May, June, called the NYPD SVU directly. And I went with the therapist because she was there in person. And if I hadn't, I might have avoided this entire situation if I'd gone the Joyful Heart route, which is just, again, something that kind of crosses my mind occasionally. This advocate had called the NYPD for me and said, okay, so this detective answered the phone. He's really nice. He's waiting for your call. Just give him a call back when you're ready. This was must have been June 2013. Yeah, I remember the exact date, June 13th, 2013. I was sitting in my favorite park in Seattle. I love going to this place, and I still go there to reflect when I'm home. And I picked up my phone, and I called the NYPD. And Detective Lucas Skorzewski answered the phone, and it was his cell phone. He was extremely nice. He was empathetic. He was like, I'm really glad you called. If you want to file this report, this is what we do. And I decided to file a police report. And I remember feeling really empowered in that moment and being, okay, I'm doing this. And he was nice. And I was like, this is everything I wanted. The person that I was hoping would be assigned to my case in terms of just how I felt when I talked to him was him. And it was everything I wanted. So it was determined because of this had the possibility of being a high profile investigation because of who was involved. It was determined that they would have to go through a little bit more, not hoops, but they wanted to do a little bit more stringent to make sure that the interview process and everything went well. Again, usually what they would do is they would take my report over the phone. Instead, because of this propensity to be a high profile case, they were going to fly directly to me to talk to me in person. He wanted to speak to me in person. I was pre-nursing school at this point. So I was working at Starbucks. I didn't make a lot of money. I couldn't afford to fly to New York to do that. So because I was reporting an assault, they would fly out to Seattle on the New York City's dime, essentially, to take my report in person. And that was determined that we were going to do that the weekend of July 4th. So again, I was going through therapy at this time. We had kind of a conference call and decided, hey, July 5th is going to be the day. We decided where we're going to meet. Since it was a weekend, a holiday weekend, a lot of places were closed. We were going to meet on my university campus, and they were going to take my report. It was the detective and the lieutenant. Lieutenant was coming too because, again, possibility of a high-profile investigation. My detective was very young for he was, I think, only 30 at the time, which is pretty young for SVU detective. They wanted to make sure he was kind of doing a good job, so had the lieutenant come too. So the waiting period essentially was June to July. I was waiting kind of for this moment. And it was pretty rough just processing through everything that was going on and just waiting for this moment of them to fly to here. And the week of was just so stressed out. I found meditation again at the time. So I was meditating, just trying to calm my body down. July 5th comes and we meet on my university campus, and I have my advocates there with me because I wanted her there too. And there, I went to Seattle University. We met in a lactation room. It was a breastfeeding room on July 5th. So it was complete ghost town. Security met us there. They had their NYPD guns and they were in suits and looked very professional. And I was kind of deer in headlights. This is a lot to process. So we sat down in a room and I told them what happened. And again, my story is not one that would probably go to trial. I knew that, but someone's listening. Great. If it's on paper, then maybe that's doing something.
Right.
I did the whole spiel, and then the first thing the lieutenant asked me after I was done was, are you sure you really said no? That was the first thing he said. And I remember just completely shutting down. I didn't know the term dissociation. Now I do. I did a lot of that during this time. Right. And I just completely dissociated. I don't remember anything after that. No. The next day, I had a lot of questions because I kind of come back to myself and I was like, I have a lot of questions about what's next, stuff like that. So I met them for lunch. So this was July 6th. I met them for lunch in downtown Seattle. I met the detective. So Detective Skorzewski, again, he was kind, he was empathetic, everything that I'd hoped for in a detective in my case. I met him for lunch. I asked my questions. I cried a little bit. He was very nice. Afterwards, The lieutenant and his girlfriend. Oh, so the other thing is, lieutenant was there with his girlfriend, Lieutenant Lamboy. His girlfriend was a forensic nurse. I want to meet her. I was like, this is what I want to do. The lieutenant said, hey, when you're done with lunch, just let us know. You can meet my girlfriend. You can talk to her professionally. That'd be really great for you, I'm sure. I'm like, yeah, that'd be awesome. So we're done with lunch. We were in downtown Seattle. It's kind of confusing downtown area. So I said, hey, detective, I'll walk you to where your lieutenant is, and then I'll leave you guys to do whatever you're going to do. I got to go. I have to work tomorrow. So I walked them down to the Seattle waterfront, and they're all in street clothes. They're kind of hanging out. It's like an off day. They weren't interviewing me officially. And I left him where the lieutenant was, and I walked away. And the lieutenant was like, where are you going? Do you want to come with us? And I was like, am I allowed to? I thought they were going to dinner. I was like, okay. In the back of my head, and when this hit the news, like the sensationalized news, the comments that I was getting put me into a complete mental breakdown, because I was reading that slut deserved it. What the fuck was she thinking? She should have known better to go out with these men. And yes, but my brain at the time, I just told this entire story that at the time was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Unfortunately, I've been through worse now, but at the time it was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And my brain was just in complete trauma mode of also like, okay, I just told you everything that's happened. I'm entrusting you with my life, basically, and I trusted them. I'm going to listen to whatever they say because I want them to do this case. And when he invited me out, in my head, I was like, this doesn't feel right. Somewhere, again, it's ignoring that gut feeling. But I was like, oh, no, they know better. They know the best. They're the professionals. Like, yeah, I'm like, it's like I get patients. I worked a lot with veterans, and I got patients that would be like, hey, you're the boss. I'm like, no, you're the boss. It's your body. I'm not going to do anything that you don't feel like is okay. Like, right. Yes, I'm the medical professional, but you are in charge. You're the patient. So I'm thinking that's kind of my mentality. I'm like, okay, they're in charge. They know what's good for me. I'm going to trust them. So it ended up they went out to dinner, but they ended up basically going on a binge drinking adventure, and they took me along with them. And it was this, at the time, it's so hard to put into words how I felt, because it was so wrong. And I could feel that, like, I'm like, this is not something that should be happening, but it felt so good to just be seen as a person and not a victim, especially after I just told everything that had happened and have fun. That I was like, no, this is okay. Okay, this is fine. It was like I was part of the brotherhood all of a sudden.
Well, and you had never been in a similar circumstance. So your brain really is reacting to whatever input comes.
Has no idea what's going on, what to make of it. Now, in hindsight, as a medical professional, I think back and I'm like, oh my God, like if I did that to a patient, I'd be fired on the spot. And this is when I share the story, it's like, I look at it from a different lens now of like, the police are in kind of a position of power like I am as a medical provider. I can't do that stuff with patients. Right. If I did that, I'd be fired on the spot, or they, more than likely I'd be disciplined very harshly. Mm-hmm. So it's people, especially like if you're in medicine, think about it this way: is if you invited a patient out that you're still actively taking care of to go drinking with, like that's not allowed. You're not supposed to do that. Right. And that's the equivalent. I realize now, being on the professional side of it, that's the equivalent of what they were doing with me. And the hard thing is that I had a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. They treated me like a person. At some point, I talked to all of them individually. They would go away, and I was just one-on-one, and everyone heard me. I got to talk to the girlfriend, who, again, is a forensic nurse, did exactly what I wanted to do. And I felt seen and heard, and I was having fun. And I was like, I know this is wrong. Like, I could feel it somewhere in here, but I was like, you know what? I'm okay right now, so I'm just going to go with it. That's important because, God, the comments that I got on the articles that came out were so horrific. Again, like, the slut deserve it. Bitch had it coming to her. What the fuck was she thinking? It was awful. But anyways, it was like a 6-hour drinking binge. By the time night had fallen, I stayed out a couple hours. I was like, I need to go home. I have to go to work. And they're like, no, just call out. We'll cover for you. And I'm like, I can't just call. And then I was drunk and I couldn't drive. I had parked my car in my university. I was like, I can't drive home now. I'm too intoxicated. They're like, don't worry, we'll cover for you. And I'm like, okay, sure. So we were in this place in Seattle called Capitol Hill, which is kind of like the party section, a gay section of Seattle. I went to school there. It's really fun. It's a really fun place to just walk and go out if you want to go out, night on the town. And I remember it was Saturday night. So lines were just so long to get into clubs. They would flash their NYPD badges to cut the line to get in front of everybody. And I'm just like, part of me was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I feel so cool right now, but it's so fucked up. yeah, we're NYPD. We're going to cut the whole line. Like just total abuse of like power and city dollar. Like this is all in the city's dime. So towards the end of the night, I was like, I need to go home. I need to go home. They're like, no, just come and stay at our hotel. It'll be fine. And I'm like, what? Like, because I couldn't drive. Like I was intoxicated enough. I couldn't drive. Like I'm safe. I don't do that. They were staying in a town called Bellevue, which is across the water from Seattle. And Bellevue is very hoity-toity. They were across the I-90 bridge. So across the water, Lake Washington. It had been going on. We'd been out for like 6 hours. I had never seen someone drink so much in my life. And obviously they very clearly held their liquor, except for Detective Skorzewski, who was 30 at the time, could not hold his alcohol, and he got kicked out of a bar at one point. He was so intoxicated that they kicked him out. So at this point, I think it was like 10 or 11 p.m. and the lieutenant and his girlfriend got into like almost a fist fight. And then she stormed out and got into a cab. So Skorzewski and I are sitting there kind of like, this isn't good. So then lieutenant was like, we got to go find her. So, he'd been drinking for like 10 hours and gets in this rental car across the bridge and to get to Bellevue. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, he's driving really fast and he's had a lot of alcohol. And they're like, just come back to her hotel. And I was like, I couldn't even think at that point because there's too much to process. Again, I just divulged this whole story and I was in the situation and I'm like, this feels so wrong, but I'm also being seen as a person that isn't just a victim and they're having fun with me. And they're people that I respect at the time, respected and admired and wanted to be like and had career aspirations. So it was a very confusing thing for my 23-year-old traumatized brain. We got back to the hotel. The lieutenant told Skorzewski, just take care of her. I got to go find the girlfriend. So I was left with this detective, who's 30. I'm 23. He gives me they were in like a suite. They had their own room. So he had his own room and he gave me the bed, gave me some clothes. He slept on the couch, again, was very respectful. And before he went to bed, he said, Rachel, you're really cool. No, you're awesome. I'm like, thanks. Like, oh, I'm not just some traumatized victim. Like I felt special, right? Yeah. Went to bed, woke up. It was my sister's birthday, July 7th. So I called and said, happy birthday. And I was, felt terrible because I had a horrible hangover. And I was in bed and he came into the room and somehow eventually ended up in the bed with me. And I don't know, like I wasn't really paying attention, but then I realized he was in the bed and I was like, oh my God, this can't be happening. I remember he started like touching me and he said something about how attracted he was to me, or I don't remember. I really froze in this situation here. Talk about freeze response. This was like the epitome of a freeze response. Sure. I remember saying to him the same thing that I told the rapist, I need to leave my clothes on. And I just told him that in my interview the day before, 2 days before. And he chuckled. When I said that, he chuckled. And that's when I froze. And I was on my side at one point and I could feel his erection pressing against my back. And I just completely froze. He didn't take my clothes off, but there was some things that happened that I definitely was not okay with. And I completely froze. And I remember just being like, this can't be happening. I didn't know what to do. I like I said, my brain just stopped. It's really hard to describe, right? But I completely just froze. And then I don't remember why he stopped, but then he said he had never cheated on his wife before until this moment and like kind of blamed me. And then he went to take a shower. And then I just broke down crying because I don't know how to comprehend what just happened. Right. And just to say this, I never viewed this as an assault in a way it was because he's in a position of power. Again, there wasn't any rape involved, but it was a very non-consensual experience and this shouldn't have happened. So I never even labeled it as that. People in the news articles labeled it as a sexual assault. I don't know what to call it. It was something that happened that was horrible in this situation. But I remember just having a meltdown and I texted the lieutenant. I said, are you awake? That's all I said. And the first thing he responded was, yeah, are you okay? It was the first thing he said. And I was like, again, that's an odd thing to say. So then I'm thinking like, okay, like, does he think that something just happened? Did he like, I didn't know what to make of it. The detective came back out and again said that I couldn't tell anybody, like this had to be kept between us or else my, lieutenant later said my credibility would be shot, but about what happened sexually, he said, I never cheated on my wife before. You can't tell this to anybody. I was like, okay. So I pretend like it didn't happen. I didn't tell my therapist for weeks. I went home that day. I didn't tell anybody. I don't think I'd even told my family. My family didn't know yet. I didn't even tell them about the legal case. Nothing. They didn't know anything. And I don't even remember if I think I told a friend, but it took me a couple weeks to tell my therapist even. And I remember when I told her, I minimized it so greatly. And she had to stop. She was like, wait, this is not okay. She's like, I'm getting, like, my skin is crawling right now with what you just told me. Tell me again, did that really happen? I'm like, yeah, but it's fine. Yeah, but it's fine. Oh, I forgot to say, the day after, so right before they left, we met up one more time when I was at work, and the lieutenant said, you can't tell anyone about this weekend or else your credibility will be shot. So I was just like, okay, so I just have to, like, I don't know how to make sense of any of this, and I can't tell anybody. So, like, here I am thinking like they're looking out for me and I'm part of the brotherhood and I'm all cool. And then now it's like, wow, if I tell anyone anything about what happened, my case is going to be thrown out. Mm-hmm. And they put me in that position. So that's why I didn't tell my therapist for a couple of weeks. When I finally did, because it was really affecting my functioning, obviously, she was horrified. And then I never brought it up. I didn't bring it up to Skorzuski again until the fall, which I'll get to. I had questions. So it was decided that with my case, there wasn't much to go on. I recently learned that this is a pretty common theme in the NYPD. They were going to set up a controlled phone call for me. So I was going to call my rapist and try to get him to admit what happened. Right. That is apparently their go-to, and it's just not a great way to do things. It's very traumatic. But in the state of Seattle, it's illegal. You have to, it's a 2-party consent rule for recording. So I couldn't call him and have someone listen in and record in the state of Washington. I had to be in another state. So it was just determined that I would go back to New York and do the controlled phone call in the SVU precinct. Decided it was going to be in October. I was going to my best childhood friend's wedding in Boston. So I was like, this was like still July at this point. I was like, okay, I just have to make it a few months and then I'll just be done and I can move on. So again, this whole thing happened with Skorzuski and I kind of just pushed it away. I had a couple questions, like they were going to meet with the DA and stuff. So I had questions regarding my case because of the time difference. It was always like, he had to call me back because we're always missing each other. I had all these questions and he said, I'll call you back later. I'll call you back later. And then finally there was a day where I had no more questions and I was like, okay, well, I guess we're not going to talk until October. And meanwhile, again, I still had this experience with him that was so wrong that I'm just pretending didn't happen. Yeah. I had no more questions, so I figured that was going to be it. And then he said, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. I was like, oh, okay. Like I thought maybe he had more stuff to my case. He started calling me every day to and from work, 2 hours a day. He would drive an hour to work and an hour back and form this relationship with me. And I say this because their phone record, he called me. Like I never called him. He always called me and he formed this relationship with me. And again, I'd had this experience that I just pretended didn't happen. I didn't view it that way. I'm just like, oh, I have a friend who's listening to me, who talks to me like I'm not some fucked up victim. And I just pretended again that other thing didn't happen because I couldn't comprehend on how actually horrific that was. Because again, imagine a nurse doing that with a patient. Like just, that's all I'm going to leave it at. That's essentially the same thing. I was their patient and they did that to me. I'm not legally allowed to consent in positions like that. I don't know. It's not the same thing as prisoners, but it's that type of situation where like I don't have the capacity to consent because of the power dynamic. Right. I don't know how they kept their jobs after this, but they did. I'll get to that in a second. So he started calling me every day to and from work. And then I had this like wake up call where he didn't call me one day. And then I snapped out of it. I was like, oh my God, he has a relationship with me. Like, this is not okay. And now, number one, I'm reliant on this person who is treating me like I'm almost a girlfriend, and he's the detective on my case. And now he just ghosted me. So is he just going to cut off my case and not, like, he just disappeared? And I panicked. I was like, oh my God, how did I let this happen? So I freaked out. I think his wife found out or something. And then that's when I snapped out of it. I was like, oh shit, this is a bad situation. And I blame myself. I was like, I shouldn't let that happen. But I also knew that he is in the position of power. And even then in my traumatized brain, I was like, that's his responsibility to keep that boundary. Even if I was throwing myself at him, which I wasn't, it's still his job to keep that boundary. So I had this moment of clarity of like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? So I was petrified because I couldn't get a hold of him. His phone was disconnected. So I emailed him. I'm like, hey, like what happened? Because I'm worried about my case. Like, is it just going to be thrown out? So I think his wife found out he was basically having this emotional affair with me, the victim he's investigating. And he just disappeared. Finally got a hold of him and he was like, yeah, my phone broke. Sorry. And I was like, okay, no, we need to talk because there's something not right here. And there's a lot that's not right. So again, I drafted this email response, and I confronted him a couple weeks later. And I want to point this out because he did at one point try to do the right thing. He said, I'm going to reassign the case. And I was like, at that point, I was like, it was so close to October. I was like, please don't do that. I couldn't go through it again. I was like, I cannot. In my head, reassigning the case meant I have to go through this entire process again. What if they're just the same? What if they take advantage of me? I'm like, you know what? We're so close to being done. Please don't reassign it. I just want to get it over with. Like, just don't. So we had this conversation. Again, it was like that rationalization too of like, no, just you're a nice person. Like, I know you're a good person. Like, just finish this for me and tie it up with a bow, and then we're done. We can move on. And then I confronted him and I said, I had written this. I still have it on my phone. I found it. I was going through my old notes, my iPhone. I found the note that I drafted to him the other day or a couple weeks ago. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I still have that. But it was this big note. Oh, I have it. Okay. Do you mind if I read part of it? This was written August 29th of 2013. And again, I'm coming from a standpoint of trying, like, I was fawning. So I'm trying to be, the fawn response again is another trauma response of like, everything's fine. Let me do what I need you want me to do, that you need me to do so that you're going to make everything nice and pretty and fine. Okay, Luke, I have a whole list of things I want to talk to you about, but I really only want to say 2 things right now, and the rest can wait until I see you face to face. I'm really upset about a lot of things that you said in that conversation we had on the phone a couple weeks ago. I will say this. I don't want to have you mad at me for texting you too much. I texted you because I thought you were at work last night. If you really don't want me texting you, I won't. When you first gave me your phone number, I never knew when you were at work. Why is it not okay to text like that now? I'm not a psycho. I promise you that. Are you mad at me? And then I have like a list of bullet points. Like, do you still want to be my friend? This is so sad. That's really all I want to know at this point. The rest can wait because, like I said, it's more important for me to know that we can still be friends when this is done. Like, I was still in that mentality of like, this is really sad. You should know better. I'm the victim. I'm vulnerable. It's really hurt me. Oh, okay. So what happened now, I remember we had a conversation where he confessed that he had feelings for me. I remember that. So he basically said that he had romantic feelings for me. He had developed them and that he was going to reassign the case. And then I confronted him and said, you're the professional here. Like, if you had felt that way, like it's your responsibility to maintain this boundary, not me. And he had said, no, it's your responsibility too. And that was when I was like, wow. So then I was like, you know what, please don't reassign the case. I don't want to go through this again. Let's just continue it. But I was so traumatized. I was having a really hard time functioning at work. I wasn't sleeping. Like, I had to go on a bunch of medications to sleep. And then I was petrified that he was going to just not investigate, which is essentially what happened. Okay, so here, more here too. Did you think that I have feelings for you as well? I'm upset because this line never should have been crossed in the first place. I don't mean to sound blunt, but you should have known better. I'm a victim. I'm vulnerable. It's your job to make sure that line doesn't get crossed to begin with. It can't be uncrossed now, and I can't go back to the way it was before. That's really unfair to me to be put in that position knowing full well how vulnerable I am right now. I'm not as strong as you think I am because right now I'm regretting all of this. I can't go back. I don't want to regret this process or having a friendship with you. So I need to sit down with you and we need to have a real discussion about all this face to face. I need that for my peace of mind. I want to know why. Why did you cross that line to begin with? Why did it all happen to begin with? I liked our friendship. It was like, we were chatting. You text me about your job and silly stuff. That's what I want to go back to. Too often I find myself in situations where guys can't control themselves around me. I'm not a temptress. I'm not trying to steal you away from your wife. This is very sad. I never even knew that you had feelings past that night in the hotel room. It's frustrating to me because I don't intentionally seek that out in you or anybody else. I was wondering if you actually meant that stuff. When you say stuff like, I miss you, I talk to you because you're fun and funny, and you seem to enjoy talking to me too. I don't want it to be a chore for you to try to keep in contact. I think he blamed me for like messing up his marriage. And I said that wasn't a fair thing to say. That weekend you were here, you know how we were just goofing off and having a good time. I'm not talking about that time in the hotel room, but I'm talking about how silly it all was. How even Lamboy said that when it's all over, we can all go out and get a drink together again. That's the stuff that I like. I don't even remember if I ever said this to him, but that's sad because it's just sad. Like, I was fawning and victim blaming.
it's cringeworthy how abusive he was.
Yeah, because I remember again this time, I think his wife found out, and then he blamed me again, like textbook fawning. Like, please, don't be mad at me.
I was just gonna say, offender mentality is deny, minimize, and blame.
Yeah, and to this day, I know Lamboy knows now that was the lieutenant. I don't know if this was ever told to him before my lawsuit, so I have no idea. At this point, I never said anything to him about what happened in the hotel room, so I have no idea to this day when he knew what and how. So something happened a little bit after this where I think something happened where it was like said that I had come on to him or something, because the entire SVU precinct turned against me. It's just so sad. At that point, I was just so desperate to be done with it. I was like, let me just get to this controlled phone call. I know it's not going to go anywhere, but I just want to say that I did everything that I could. October is coming. I haven't heard anything from them. I don't know what to expect, how to prepare for this. I'm petrified because I haven't talked to this guy that raped me. I haven't talked to him since I confronted him. I was trying to set up a time. I reached back out because it was on me to like establish contact. And I'm like, that's just a horrible thing to put on me. I didn't know what the fuck I was supposed to do. I'm like, I'm in this position of waiting. And I do want to mention one person, because this person was wonderful and he does deserve a shout out here. There was a detective that stepped in that was kind of like, oh gosh, he's not taking good care of your case. Let me help. His name was Detective Michael Rama, and he's wonderful. And I want to shout out to him because he did good things here. He worked the opposite shift of Skorzewski, so they never had any interface with me about my case, but I couldn't text Skorzewski on his cell phone anymore because of what had happened. So I kept calling the precinct, but I was like, what's going on? Like, I need to know how to prepare for this. I'm going to be there in a week, all this stuff. So one day this detective answered the phone. He was very kind. He goes, oh, yes, you're Rachel. I know all about you. Oh, okay. I'm going to help you out here. Let me tell you what you need to do. So I had a couple of email exchanges with him, phone calls, really nice guy. He basically kind of stepped in for the rest of the case in terms of the controlled phone call to try to actually prep me, because I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Do you know how traumatizing this is, that I have to call the guy that assaulted me and I don't know how to do this, and you're just leaving it up to me? So he kind of stepped in, and as the controlled phone call date came closer, I talked to him a couple times, still didn't tell anybody. I told my therapist what had happened about, what had been going on with the NYPD and that stuff. And she was horrified, but again, I tried to minimize it, but no one else knew about it. I didn't make that public. I think my family knew about the assault at this point, because I didn't tell anybody for months, a couple friends, that was it. So I prepped to go to New York. I had gone to my friend's wedding in Boston, took a bus the next day. And then, I do want to say, this is just kind of funny. This is somewhat personal, but it was a really important moment in my healing. I went to this wedding and I hooked up with a guy, and it was terrible. Like, it was so bad. Like, I was drunk. Like, it was so bad, but it was such an important moment for me, because I was like, that was consensual. Like, that was bad, but it was consensual. Like, and I was like, okay, like, this is clear to me. And some survivors do that. Like, it's like, take your power back. That was the first time that I'd had sex with somebody since the assault. And
yeah, it would fall into that category. Yeah. Just like, yeah. I've got to do something to feel like I'm in control. Yeah. And in control.
Again, it was bad. Like, it was comically bad, but it was consensual. And it was a really important moment for me of like, okay, like, what happened with this guy in New York was not consensual. So it was a really important moment for me of like, okay, like, now I know that I'm not just making this up, that this really did happen, and it was a sexual assault. So I went to New York, took a bus. At the time, I had a bunch of friends, and again, this is important. The SVU, so this is the TV show. There is, like, they call it the fandom, full of very, very unhealed survivors of sexual assault that, like, live in a fantasy world where Detective Olivia Benson, and I'm assuming everyone who listens to your podcast has at least heard of Law & Order SVU. Mm-hmm. It's a fantasy world where victims are treated with respect and kindness and compassion and empathy, and a lot of very unhealthy, unhealed survivors find their way to this community and, like, live in a fantasy world of, I wish it was like this. And I say this because I was a part of that for a while. It was like NYPD should be, and let's just all pretend like that's how it is in real life. And Mariska's like this pioneer for survivors, and she has her foundation, and she's like a real life Olivia Benson. And there's almost like a blending of like fact and fiction where you want to say something?
I'm curious. Yeah. Is this like an online community, or is this an in-person on set people who hang around?
Both.
Okay.
So it's huge online community. There's tons of, groups. I mean, now there's probably more, but like this was 2013. So like Instagram was like barely a thing. Like there was a lot of fan pages, chat rooms, forums. Forums don't really exist. It's more like Reddit now, but like basically what the equivalent of like Reddit used to be, like just random like groups.
Okay.
And Facebook and Instagram, I connected with some women. I'm still friends, actually really good friends with one survivor I connected with, but these other women were so unhealthy in terms of just like not healed. And again, there's no judgment there, but I say that in that there is a very unhealthy dynamic in a lot of people who watch this show that are like living in this alternate universe where Mariska Hargitay is the savior for everybody, who like every victim. And I say that because this plays a part in the story in a little bit, and it's extremely damaging because the experience with the NYPD is not sunshine and rainbows. The real SVU is not like what they show on the show. And the SVU TV show has a relationship with the NYPD Special Victims Unit. And maybe like when they first started, but they had a working relationship with them where they would go to the actual SVU precinct and learn from these detectives. So they had this kind of camaraderie that is important later on because they all blacklisted me after this experience.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Rachel's story isn't over. There's a lot more to hear about next week as Rachel continues to talk about her experiences in strong and determined ways. Rachel is unwavering in her desire to help others gain insight and strategies that help reduce the prevalence of rape and sexual assault in our society. I've said this before, and you're going to hear me keep saying it. It's important that we all do our part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. One of the best ways to do this is to start by believing when a victim or survivor reaches out to tell their story, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault, and because it's time that we start to normalize these conversations in order to help reduce the impact of rape culture in our society. Please leave me a 5-star rating on this podcast platform and email me a note of encouragement and support. Your emails are fuel to my soul in keeping this podcast going. My email address is in the episode notes, and I'd truly appreciate hearing from you. Thank you again for being here, and be sure to tune in next Tuesday for part 3 of Rachel Izzo's experiences, right here on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. We'll see you next week.
Hey, it's RC Gray from Survivor School. Did you know that trauma is not just a mental health problem? It's a whole life problem. It doesn't just impact your mind. It takes a toll on your body, your finances, your relationships, and your ability to grow. Survivor School provides you with the trauma-informed tools to help you regain control of your whole life and take control of your future today. Because healing is a journey of 1,000 destinations. Join Survivor School. We'll lead the way.